Now I'm live. All right. I knew I'd get there sooner or later. And everybody can hear me, right? Let's see if somebody says yes. Hopefully. Yay. All right. So I'm going to start. We're going to talk about honeypots and IoT security today. One of my favorite things. And got to get it. There we go. That's my evil refrigerator there. So who am I? I am Kat Fitzgerald. I actually do run B-Side Chicago, even though I live in Kirkland these days. I'm also part of some other events. You can read that fun stuff. I will have my slides available today. I'll give you my Twitter at the end of this, and I'll be posting my slides out there so you'll all be able to see it. I am based in Kirkland. I'm a natural creature of winter, and you'll typically find me sipping fine Casa Noble Añejo tequila while defending my systems with open source security and magic spells, and of course, dancing flamingos. And you all say dancing flamingos? Yes, this is Sasha, my dancing flamingo. All right, now you've seen everything, I know. Also, honeypots and refrigerators and appliances, I love them. I do love to cook. The only reason I'm saying that right now is because, okay, never mind. So the only reason I say I love to cook is because last night I was getting nervous before this presentation. So I put up a new spice rack in my kitchen, and I wanted to share that with everybody. So here's a picture of my spice rack that I put up last night. So what do you think? I think it looks pretty good. Anyway, let's get a little serious about this. Okay, please remember the views and opinions I will be talking about today are mine and mine alone. They have nothing to do with my employer or past employers. All righty, so why are we not here? This is not going to be a demo of 5,000 different honeypots. We don't have enough time to do that. I'm not showing you all of my honeypots. I have them scattered all over the place. But no, I'm not going to share them with you. Sorry. Honeypots are only part of your security posture, but they are an important part. People are not taking advantage of these things. And I'm also going to show you how to use them in the IoT world. All right. So why are we here? Well, spending in 2020 exceeded to $123 billion on information security. Breaches are on the rise. They continue. We're doing something wrong, folks. And even security stuff, you know, all those fancy Blinky boxes and Blinky software that we put in, they're vulnerable. They have problems and so on. Also, lateral movement. When you talk about things like major breaches in major corporations, some that might begin with E and have a Q in there, the hackers were in the environment for months. They were not detected in the lateral movement. Well, that's going to become more important in a little bit. Also, think about your own security architecture. If I asked you what was either in your business or even worse, your home today, would you know everything that is installed in your home environment? I bet you wouldn't. I think you might be surprised. I love this quote from John Strand. If you don't have this book, Offensive Countermeasures, you should get it. But instead of brilliance, we've standardized on mediocrity. And what I mean by that, and what I think John might mean, but I know what I mean by it, we go out, we buy stuff, or we get internet security, insurance and things like that, and it just doesn't seem to solve the problem. We really have to rethink how we're doing this. And I think honeypots, deception technology, whatever you want to call it, that's going to help a lot. And we're going to see that as we look at IoT. I like to share this comic for two reasons. One, it really does show where all the problems exist today. It happens to be human error. As we see in this corner, we have firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, and all that other stuff. And in this corner, we have Dave. And the second reason I like to share this is because my old boss's name was Dave. So I tease him about it all the time. Also, I was at the last time I was at an actual security conference. Anybody remember those? Um, I walked around with sensors in my purse. I have Raspberry Pis with little software-defined radios on them, and I go and I search for things, and I found a GoPro that I was able to connect to. Somebody was walking around with a GoPro on them, and I saw a visual. I got a camera that I was looking at. I thought, wow, this is fascinating. I found, various devices that I could pair to. I was really shocked at this. And then the amount of Wi-Fi SIDs that I found at a security conference. I couldn't believe it. This person was obviously a traveler, United Wi-Fi, Fly-Fi, Southwest, and so on. So we get quite an idea of what this particular person is doing. Okay, let's talk about some example attacks by IoT devices. There was a university that was attacked by its light bulbs, its vending machines, and its lamp posts. Would someone please explain to me why these devices were on the university's main network? They should have been on a different network. In the industrial world, we run into one of my favorite where an oil rig was actually shut down because an IoT device was hacked. And that's because there was a sensor on the oil rig that if the sensor detected a tilt in the oil rig of 10 degrees, then it would shut down all operations on the oil rig. Somebody was screwing around with it. They got it to register 11 degrees and it shut down the oil rig. There was a blast furnace that actually melted down. It didn't hurt anybody, but it melted down. And somebody please explain to me why toilets are connected to networks. I really don't understand this. I guess it brings new meaning to the word system dump. Anyway, we're not going to go there. But first, let's talk about your lab. Because if you're going to get into doing honeypots, deception technology, and IoT, you need a lab. You need to virtualize your environment. Right now, you can probably see behind me, there is some of my stuff back there that you'll all see in videos, and of course my cat condo. But there's a whole bunch of Raspberry Pis. There's a couple of Intel NUCs in there that are virtualized, running all sorts of things, which I'm going to show you in just a little bit. I've already mentioned Raspberry Pi as Get Some. I run OpenWRT and on my routers. I have more than one router in this place. You have to have the equipment. I love OpenSense. If you don't have it, get it, play with it, virtualize it, just get to know it, see what you can do with it. When I say random stuff, there's a lot of different things that you can do with Raspberry Pis or with virtualized systems. So that's what I'm talking about. We're going to look at some of these as we go with some extra stuff out there. Now, let's talk about honeypots. What is a honeypot? Well, a honeypot is essentially deception technology. I have no idea why they decided to call it deception technology. I think it was a marketing ploy to get people to go and buy more of these commercial version of honeypots. It's the same technology. They've just come up with ways to kind of deploy it easier and so on. But the whole point here is a honeypot is a resource with no value. The value of that resource is when it's used. I'm going to show you a couple of other things that are going to be thinking outside the honeypot, so to speak. We'll talk about that in a second. But most of our honeypots are not going to hack back. I'm not going to show you anything that is going to hack back or attack anyone else. Okay? Important points to remember. Deployment. Where you put your honeypots is so incredibly important. I worked somewhere before and we deployed honeypots all over the company's environment. And we got a new manager. Actually, it was a new CISO. But they came in and they sent a memo out to all of the other managers and said, hey, we just deployed honeypots all over the corporation. We just wanted to let you know where they were. These are the IP addresses, et cetera, et cetera. Stupidest thing in the world. We then deleted all the honeypots and started over. Why? Because what's the point of telling the people that you're trying to see if they're doing bad things from actually discovering the honeypot? Okay, customization. This is your number one thing. If you're not customizing honeypots, wait till I show you some stuff. You're going to go, ooh, I guess I should have customized my honeypot. There are hundreds of types of honeypots out there, probably 1,000. Here's a few. I love Open Canary. This one is absolutely awesome. ADHD, I'm going to show you that in a second. Honey Badger. This is the only one where people might say, but isn't this hacking back? No, it's not. Because what Honey Badger does is it just tells you the geolocation of where the person or the bad actor is. And it's usually pretty accurate. There's the Common Honey Network or Community Honey Network, which replaced Modern Honey Network. The whole point of all of these is the fact that there are so many of them. Which one do you want? And what about the real thing? What's stopping you from putting an actual server doing, a file server and make it a honeypot? The only difference is you put honey documents on it or honey keys, honey credentials. We don't have to get fancy, okay? This is ADHD. I mentioned I said I would mention it a little bit more just a minute ago. And what it is, it's active defense harbinger distribution. It is not only a great tool to play with honeypots, but it's a great learning tool. And you can actually use the packages in this and then deploy them in your environment if you want. Or you want to definitely customize these. There's the link to it, activecountermeasures.com, under free tools, under ADHD. Take a look at this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the documentation is fabulous. You're going to see, as you do right here, you see all sorts of links to the documentation. We are going to talk about this one today, Calorie. So we'll look at that in a little more detail coming up, okay? Remember lateral movement. Lateral movement enables an adversary to access and control remote systems on a network. They move around. See, I told you I was going to bring this up and make it more important a little while ago. And it is part of the MITRE attack methodology or attack stance here. And lateral movement is critical. If we can't detect lateral movement, whether it's in my own apartment with IoT devices that who knows if they're infected with something, or if it's in a company, or what about webcams that I put up in an apartment complex or something like that. Think of all these various areas where I need to detect lateral movement, okay? Now, I'm hoping that a lot of you have either heard of this or already know what OODA is. OODA is used by the government. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And it was how you run warfare, how you do battles, how you do attack simulations, all these various things. Well, in the honeypot world, I decided, you know what? I think there's another one, and I think I'm going to call it CCAD instead of OODA. And CCAD stands for confuse, confound, annoy, one of my favorites, and delay. Because if I can delay the attackers, I can probably detect them. So I might even say that the D here in delay goes, let's say it's two words. Let's say it's delay and detect. All right. Let's talk about monitoring. Very, very important. If you're not monitoring your environment, especially your IoT stuff, well, then what are you doing? Okay. I recommend this. It's an open source solution. It's called Waza. I like to say Wazoo. It's easier to say. Here's a couple of examples of some screenshots I threw up just to give you an idea. If I could change, well, I'll wait until, if we have time, I'll show you. I have an active monitor of Waza running in the background right now, and I'll show you that. And it's got some of my honeypots talking to it. If we have time, we'll get into that. These are just some other screenshots just to show you the power. It's built on an elk stack, but it can feed a lot of different things. Keep in mind, if you're not monitoring, it's kind of useless, okay? Deployment. This is critical. If we don't put things in the right place and we don't customize it, then what good is honeypots, especially in IoT? IoT is probably more critical. Simple example of this in a previous lifetime, shall we say, at another company, we actually deployed honeypots that were based on, this was older technology, it was Raspberry Pi 2s at the time, but they were Raspberry Pi 2s. We built bunches of them to emulate a point of sale system. We then shipped these all around to what you might call our offices, if you will, and they were the people that at the offices were told, just plug these into the environment in certain areas and leave them there. Why did we do this? Because we'd been having problems with potential credit card skimmers being installed on the actual point of sale systems. Once we put these in place, within 2 months, we actually caught the people that were installing the credit card skimmers because they tried to install one on the honeypot. The honeypot was a Raspberry Pi. It cost 25 bucks. Yes, we had to put it in over 800 locations, but how many solutions of doing security can you do for under, $1,000? Not that many. So think about, plan this, think about how you're going to do it. Honeypots, honeyports, honey tokens, all of these are people want them. The bad actors want them. All of you that manage Windows environments, one of the first things you do when you stand up a Windows AD server is you change the administrator account. You change that to something else and you change the password. Well, why don't you leave an administrator account, or more correctly, put a new one in so it doesn't have all the privileges, give it some sort of funky password, lock it down so it doesn't have access to things, but make it so if it is logged in, your SIM, your monitor, will trigger at a very high level and say, holy crud, somebody just logged into the administrator account and we know that's fake. So keep that in mind. Use these things that are lures. Also, customization, dear Lord, please. I see people put out honeypots with self-signed certificates. Well, what good is that? It looks like a fake already, okay? Also, you could put on actual applications on a honeypot. Just lock down the application, take most of the functionality out of it. So you think about how you want to use the honeypots. I mentioned monitoring. This is just where I say either a host intrusion detection system, which is OSEC or Waza, some sort of SIM, and have it flag your honeypots at a very high level so you see these. Where do you put all this stuff? Everywhere. I've got a honeypot that actually looks like a mail server. It looks very much like XM. If you've ever used Linux mail servers, XM is a great mail delivery tool, a mail transfer agent. Well, I've modified mine so it triggers if anybody actually tries to log into it. But it's not part of my actual MX record in my domain, but it is sitting on the same network as my mail servers. So if someone happens to try to break into it, they're going to set it off. Also, we're going to talk about Showdown in a minute here, but you really do want to put these things everywhere, okay? Here's an idea. This might kind of be what my apartment looks like. You know, here's my ISP. I run an OpenSense firewall here. I have a DMZ off of that. You can't see it, but there's another network off of this one. And then here's my actual network where I'm sitting right now. They're all separate. They're locked down and firewalled. But I have, not only do I have honeypots sitting on my DMZ, I have them here as well. I installed a couple of honeypots that were sitting here. Why? Because I've had IoT devices that just start scanning my network. I know there are certain types of devices, like maybe TVs, that will look for things like speakers and so on, but they shouldn't do it all the time, and they shouldn't try to log into things. There's another story that goes along with that, but let's just say you'll have to wait on that one. Also, here's a simple little command. This command is a great way to use Netcat as a dummy web server. If I wanted it to just, whoops, come back here. If I wanted it to just serve up a 200 OK and I put it on a Raspberry Pi somewhere sitting out in a weird network, and I see someone connect to it and I have it trigger, then I'm going to know immediately that someone is trying to get into this. What if I put it on a network that has a whole bunch of webcams on it? Well, webcams, it's not like I can get into those and modify all the software. But if I can put something out there that looks like a webcam, maybe I can catch people. But who would think of just using the netcat command to actually be a honeypot? Not many people do, but it's easy to do. And when you think about it, there's a good thing to do. Let's talk about the customization. Then I'm going to show you some examples here. So we're going to start with your friends and neighbors. And why do I say that? Because you don't own everything out there. My friends and neighbors happen to own crazy appliances. I have one that loves to have all her kitchen appliances on her network. Everything from the big refrigerator that has the screen on it so she can read her email when she goes to the refrigerator. I have no idea why. Someone please explain that to me. But there's also a camera in the refrigerator, so when she goes to the store, she can pull it up on her phone and see what's in her refrigerator. What she didn't realize was her refrigerator was vulnerable to a denial of service attack, and I accidentally did it, and it turned her refrigerator off. So I ended up buying her groceries. But you learn a lot about these things. Yes, she knows I did it, and we do make agreements. They say it's fine. So I wouldn't do this without checking with my friends and neighbors. But I also asked her, can I scan this, gather information like banners and everything else, so I can make a honeypot that looks exactly like this crazy refrigerator? Great thing to do. But you can also use Showdown and get banners and versions in HTML, and I'll show you that. If you don't know what Showdown is, you will in a minute, but you need to learn Showdown, okay? Also, customize your certificates. With Let's Encrypt these days, there is no reason you should not have valid certificates out there. But here's another little trick. What if I left the key to a certificate on a honeypot? I left the private key. Make it so it's a dummy domain and everything else, and it happens to be misconfigured. But if it gets stolen or compromised and somebody sets it up somewhere because they think, ooh, I've got the key, I'll create a certificate, put it on my own honeypot, then when you find these things, you know that where the bad actors are. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this stuff. Make sure you modify well, I already mentioned the honey tokens. Think about accounts that already exist, you know. Also, when it comes to the hosts, this is where I'm going to show you some examples. We're going to talk about why this is so important. But the file systems themselves, We have to get those done. We have to make sure the commands are different and they're all there. What about the history? Because how many people log into a Unix machine and they're going to type history to see, ooh, what have I found? What's in this history? What about all the processes on the system when they type a PS command, or if it's a Windows honeypot, okay? Think about honey tokens. Oh, I'm a little redundant there, but they're important, okay? Don't be afraid to use real servers and real apps. I'll show you that in a second. You can put them out in staging environments. It's a good place to do it. The point here is too legit to quit because I want it to look real. And I'll show you why. If it doesn't look real, what's the point? Here's a perfect example of this. Recently, there was a new release of Calorie, which is a common SSH telnet honeypot that's used. In the release notes, when they sent out the new version, it said, well, we renamed the built-in user that used to be called Richard to Phil. Why? Because that's how scanners were detecting that this honeypot was out there, that was actually a honeypot, because no one was taking the default account out of Calorie. They were leaving it on there. So if you logged in and you found the account Richard, there was a 99% chance that you just found a honeypot. The things that people don't think about, and they should. Now let's look at Showdown. Does anybody notice anything interesting about this particular Showdown? This was looking for SQ webcams. And here appears to be a webcam, but Showdown has detected it as a honeypot. There's another one that appears to be a honeypot. When you look at the headers on these things, they match identically. One's in Romania, one's in Switzerland, kind of interesting, you know, but nothing has been customized. So of course they're honeypots. Look at this one. This is the exact same honeypot type of device or setup. Well, what do you notice right here? If you're a Linux person, you've probably heard of Linode. It's a great place to go and set up small systems that can be used for honeypots. How many webcams do you know that are installed on a cloud device? Yeah, not that many. They're going to be on private networks, or at least networks registered to companies and corporations and exposed. They're not going to be sitting in a cloud device. And of course, they didn't bother to modify anything. And when you start to see all the supported SSL versions and you see the certificate, oh, internet widgets, the default of pretty much how many different honeypots that are out there. Really bad. This was identified. But here was one that's valid. Found it just the other day. Started poking around. It's a perfectly wide open webcam. It actually belongs to a company. This is not the company it belongs to. This is just where the ISP is, but I did cut off the IP, so you can't see it. But, you know, it's sitting there. This one, I don't know. This was another one that was valid. The only reason I put it up there is I thought it was funny because it was called Sunrise, and yet, doesn't look very sunrisey to me. Oh, well. The point here is Showdown is hugely powerful. You can use it to gather banners and HTML code and so on and find things. If I were to go back and say, you know, this one's valid, if I were to do a wget or a curl and just grab the HTML code on the page that this is showing, it's exposed. I'm not stealing anything. I'm not trying to break in. They have it wide open. I might notify them, which I did. But if you gather the code, you can use that and deploy it either on a Raspberry Pi or something else and have it mimic the login page for that particular type of webcam. So keep these things in mind. Now, let's see how many of you are paying attention. We're looking at this screen. How many people can tell me what kind of device this is? And I'm looking in the chat to see if anybody's going to say anything. Does it look pretty obvious? I mean, it says it's Linux. It's an ARM processor, and it seems to be running ASUS WRT, which is the ASUS operating system for ASUS-based Wi-Fi routers. I ran a DF on it. Looks kind of legit. I mean, this stuff, I haven't seen it before except on ASUS routers. But in reality, it happens to be Calorie. It's a Raspberry Pi configured to look exactly like an ASUS router. This is just the setup environment that the Calorie has. There's a lot of modifications. I'm going to show you some of those coming up, but it's a very, very powerful and simple honeypot. When you think about most of the IoT devices that are compromised, they're compromised in two ways: SSH or Telnet, or HTML or the web server. That's how people get into these things. And that's what we're going to see here. Take a wild guess at this one. It looks very much like OpenVPN. It might be my personal OpenVPN into my apartment here. But then again, maybe it's not. Maybe if you were to download that particular client software and try to run it on your system because you think, aha, I'll break into your OpenVPN using your configuration. What you will be downloading and running is Honeybadger, and Honeybadger will report back to me where you happen to be in the world. And it's pretty darn accurate in many, many cases. It doesn't do any harm. It doesn't hurt the client machine that they're trying to run it on. Doesn't deposit any ransomware or anything like that. But it does report back, ooh, somebody just ran this and they happen to be in Nova Scotia or Russia or wherever. It's very easy to take that existing software of OpenVPN and configure it in such a way that it's a honeypot. So you take the real application, but you modify it a little bit, okay? Let's talk about Calorie. This is what I use a lot. The two I probably use most predominantly are going to be Calorie and OpenCanary. OpenCanary is also very, very flexible, and I use it to mimic web servers and FTP servers and other types with a lot of customization. Because of the length of the talk today, I don't have enough time to do both, so I picked Calorie to kind of go into some of the configurations of it. Calorie, we have the obvious things that we want to configure. The host name. First and foremost, I've seen people where they just leave it as what the default host name is. Hence the reason Showdown picks them up as honeypots all the time. So we change the host name. But please change the MAC, because here's the problem. If I deploy Calorie on a particular type of a device, especially a Raspberry Pi, you can tell it's a Raspberry Pi by the MAC address. So here's a very simple command that will give you a randomized MAC address, and you can use that and change the MAC address on the system that you're running your honeypot on. So remember, if it's common knowledge of what these devices are, you're not going to fool anyone unless you change this stuff. Okay? Versions. When you're on a honeypot, the first thing that an attacker is looking at, what is the version of SSH or Telnet or HTTP? Does it show up with the correct information? Also, if you are going to mimic a web server, remember, people have phones, right? If they try to connect to that same honeypot with a phone and it doesn't load the correct response and the mobile version, then either one, the web people did a bad job, they didn't create one for the web, or two, it's probably a honeypot, okay? So we want to make sure we modify these things so they look right. History. When I log into a honeypot, I better damn well see a history of commands that have been entered. And here's a tip. Think about what that history will be. If I type history and I see some SSH commands to other hosts on that honeypot, the first thing I'm going to think of as an attacker, if I've been fooled by this so far, is the fact that, well, those are other targets. I should probably check those out. So set up a weak honeypot, but then set up another honeypot that is a little harder to get into, and don't advertise that one. Don't even have that one pingable, because the only way they find it is if they get into the first honeypot and then they see it in the history. There is a simple way to create history files. I'll show you here in a minute. Well, so we want commands, and the way we do that is I can either use history -s. If you've ever logged into a Unix system, do history -s and then put a command. It won't run that command, but you know what it does? It drops the command into the history file. So you could do history -s, SSH, and some bogus host, or that host that I was just saying could be your other honeypot. Or I could have, who knows, I could have a curl command or some sort of wget that loads maybe a file that looks like it contains passwords. You know, put commands in there, or just copy your bash history file or whatever history file you happen to be on. Take out sensitive things and edit them, but you can then put those in Calorie. I'm not going into all the details of how to put them into Calorie. The documentation will show you that. I'm just pointing out the important things to change, because if you don't change them, this thing that you're going to put out there is going to be identified as a honeypot within a few seconds that Showdown finds it or an attacker finds it. The file system. It is so easy to tell a honeypot by just looking at the file system, because most people don't change any of it. Why? Because, oh, it's hard. No, it's not. No, it's not. Set up a Raspberry Pi or even a Linux VM on your system. Stand up Ubuntu, maybe 18, 16, whatever version you want. Do an rsync of that entire file system and send it over to the honeypot. You'll need to make sure your honeypot has room. Then what you do is there's a command called, whoops, oh wait. Oh yeah, it's coming up in the next slide. I'm gonna go into the details, sorry. Give me a second, one more slide. And don't forget monitoring. So these things are the things you're gonna change, but now let's actually do it, okay? So banners, this part is easy. Change, if you set up a honeypot, make sure that the same warning banner is there of when you log in on your regular system. It says, warning, you're gonna be monitored if you log in here and blah, 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 blah. If you leave it off, that's a bad thing. Also, the ciphers and the version of SSH need to be correct. That's easy enough to do. Set up the VM, install a version of Linux that you're trying to mimic on the honeypot. Do an SSH V, get the capital V, get the version that's there, and use that header to put it over here in, put it over here. I'm pointing at my other screen because that's where my honeypot is. I don't know. Also, think about this. Are all your devices pingable on your network? If they are, then your honeypot better be pingable. But if your regular devices are not pingable, then neither should your honeypot. So you should block pings. That can easily be done in the kernel level of the system. Rsync is your friend. This is what I was getting to tell you here in a minute. So I've stood up an Ubuntu 18 system because I want my honeypot to look exactly like Ubuntu 18, because I'm going to put two things on it. I'm going to put an SSH honeypot on it, and I'm going to put an Apache, a HTML web version on there. I will do an rsync from the system over to my honeypot. I then use a tool called it goes into HoneyFS, and I then use CreateFS that actually mimics and formulates that actual file system that was Ubuntu into the honeypot file system. Because it has to have two things. It has to be rsynced over so the entire files are there into the HoneyFS folder. But then when you run CreateFS, that actually creates what is known as the pickle file. And the pickle file is metadata. So when users are doing ls in the honeypot, because remember, it's an emulated system, but it still has to be fast. Okay, so you have to run these commands to get it to do it. But I see so many SSH honeypots that have the exact same file system as every other honeypot. So it's so easy to feed. You get into it and you go, oh, that's a honeypot. And you leave and you never come back. Remember, we want to delay these people. We want them to sit on this system and do stupid things so we can learn what their attack methods are as well as who they are. Okay. Also, PS. We need to PS on a running system so we can get in all the processes, and then we can bring those over to the honeypot and create a fake PS. And here's where I ran a PS command. This is what it is. This is the output I get. This output needs to be put into a JSON format that is over on Calorie. But you could probably write a script that could convert this output into JSON. And the JSON basically uses the values of CPU, mem, PID, RSS start, and all these values are equal to it. So you have this big long file that has all this stuff in it, but it looks real. Because how many honeypots have you logged into, where you actually saw an IMAP login from a real IP? I would change this IP. It's out on, I don't know, it's probably Verizon or some 67. Anybody know off the top of their head? It's some telco, I'm sure. The point here is this doesn't look like a honeypot, and yet, gosh darn it, and yet it actually is. We even see things like the correct version of HTTPD that is running in the foreground. We see PHP that is running as part of the HTTP daemon, and so on. Even Nginx that is running on this. If I saw this after I logged into an actual honeypot, I'm going to go, this definitely looks a lot more real than most honeypots that I've seen these days. Okay. Yes, it takes time, but you build a script and then you run that script on different systems at different times to get different output and put it over on your honeypots. That's exactly what we did in the example that I mentioned, where we created point of sale systems. We had to mimic those on multiple Raspberry Pis that got shipped out there. I mentioned there were over 800 of them. So we had a very simple kind of assembly line. We could build a honeypot in a matter of a few seconds. Now, okay, it was a couple of minutes because it was copying file systems and stuff to micro SD cards, and that took a little longer than we wanted. The point here is make it look legit. So this goes back to 2014, the fact of, 84% of organizations that had been breached had evidence of that breach in their log files. The problem was they never saw it. When Equifax was hacked, they were in their environment for months before they were detected. If only we had put honeypots in there that would detect actual lateral movement, but they didn't, So let's look at our key takeaways from today's session. CCAD, everybody remembers what it stands for, right? Right. Confuse, confound, annoy, and okay, we'll say delay and detect. How's that? Honeypots are very low false positives. If I create honeypots that look like webcams and I get people trying to log into them, I'm pretty sure it's not my networking guys, because they already know where where the real cameras are, or I'm sorry, not networking guys, the security guys. They know where the real cameras are, and they're using their system to look at the cameras, not to log into them. They defend and detect. The reason they defend is because the longer they delay the person, the more they're going to allow for detection, and that's where lateral movement comes in. They are incredibly cost effective. Keep that in mind. Like I said, Raspberry Pis, my God, you could throw a bunch of Raspberry Pi 3s out there as honeypots, or even tiny little VMs that you could put out there. Just don't put your webcams out in the cloud, because they don't live there. They're also great for forensics. When people get into those honeypots, they drop stuff. They drop payloads. I'm hoping all of you remember Mirai, when that hit years ago, and it was actually embedded into webcams all around the country and brought down the eastern seaboard of the internet and so on. I had a copy of the Mirai payload sitting on one of my honeypots. The problem was I never took the time to actually look at it until the attack occurred. And then I went, son of a gun. And I went and looked at it and figured out what it did, but people had already beaten me to it. Okay. This is real threat intelligence. I'm sorry if you're a vendor and you're one of those companies that do threat intel. I've never been a fan. This is real threat intel. Remember, it's about thinking differently, not watching everything. If you have hundreds of thousands of systems out there, especially with working remotely and everything else, it's very hard to do detection unless I put all those little tripwires out there and don't tell people where they are. This I share, it's a particular package called HomePwn. It is known as the Swiss Army knife for pen testing of IoT devices. I use it to actually gather information from IoT devices. I do try to break into them, but I like to get in and make my honeypots look exactly like these IoT devices. All that being said, I want to thank you very much. This is as much as I could kind of squeeze in. I did it in 45 minutes, just over 45 minutes, which means we have a little bit of time for questions. So I can look in the chat, and if anybody does have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in real time. I will pause for a minute and see anything. Nobody? You mean you all learned so much that you're now going to go out and install your first honeypot, right? And you're going to make it mimic a webcam, but not like the ones that we saw on Showdown. Here's, let's see, can I show this? Probably, probably not. If I stop, let's see, can I change which window? I'm sharing a window. I think I have to share the other window. One sec. Share screen, pick a Chrome tab. Nope, it's an application window. Where is it? There it is. So here is my Wazoo configuration. This is monitoring a few of my real systems, but also mostly honeypots. Is it safe? Oh, somebody has a question. Is it safe for a honeypot noob to run a honeypot on a home network? Actually, I would say yes. Because if you're running a honeypot on a home network, just make sure, especially the one thing you want to do is you can set up a DMZ on most decent Wi-Fi routers these days. But this is where I would say, keep your Wi-Fi router, but get yourself an OpenSense little firewall. put OpenSense in front of your Wi-Fi router. Make your Wi-Fi router just an access point. Don't make it a router. Then you can split the DMZ and really have protection. I did that just the other week. I added a couple more honeypots that are sitting right outside my ISP. It doesn't matter. I'll say I'm on Comcast. Who cares? Everybody, we're all on various ones. And it started getting attacked within about 30 seconds. So you just want to make sure that you're isolating the network. That's where you have to be careful. That was to Nadia who asked that. So yeah, this is my firewall. Or my Wazoo configuration. I can look, and it's got all sorts of things. And one of the things I really love about it is integrity monitoring. The integrity monitoring is critical because what it's doing, if anybody gets into a honeypot, it will actually show me where files are being modified. Now, these are valid ones, but there are certain ones like, oh, there might be something here oh, that one was modified and it shouldn't have, because this might be a honeypot. I send both my honeypots and my production servers to my Wazoo. I don't split them. Some people could, but I like to keep them on the same one. But you can see there's a lot of stuff in here. And the one great thing about Wazoo as well is, oh, I don't have any because that's the last hour. I have to put the right thing in here. Let's look in the last 7 days. It actually monitors for vulnerabilities within my systems using the CVEs that it finds on the system. So it is, and yes, is Wazoo fairly easy to set up? Yes, it is. If I happen to open this up and I go Wazoo single line, or no, all-in-one install. And there you go. So there is an all-in-one deployment for Wazoo, or Waza. And here it is, this single command. Now, if you're on a small system, it's going to take a while, but it downloads and installs everything, which includes the Wazoo Manager, the ELK stack, which is critical because without the ELK stack, you don't get all that other stuff. And it gets you set up and going. There's a list of the requirements. It shows you what you need to do it. Their documentation is awesome. Take a look at this package. I don't work for them. They're an open source company, and the actual application is open source, but I do think it's one of the better tools out there. Okay, so please take a look at that. And you can see that here. There's so many things that you can do with it, from drilling down to auditing the system, your configuration management of the system. I can see, I don't know, if I were in a PCI environment, I'm not, but I could see if I would pass PCI, and that's going to show you all the various PCI requirements and how you're doing, how you're monitoring them, and so on. So this is more of a course on IoT and honeypots, but I did want to show this is a great tool that can run on there. Can the SIM be installed on a Raspberry Pi? It can. I wouldn't recommend it because the ELK stack is what's going to kill it. So that's really not going to do what you need. You need something a little bit bigger. Mine currently runs outside. I keep pointing to the side of my screen so that you all can see. Mine runs on the outside. So this is on a big server. Well, it's on a VM out there. And yeah, you definitely want to have something, and double check the requirements. Like I said, here's what you need, how many CPUs, because the ELK stack is what's going to kill it. Not kill it, but it's going to take up most of the requirements. The Wazoo server itself is not that bad. I run it on a VM with, I want to say 8 gig of RAM total, 2 cores, and that's about it. Maybe I have 16, I forget. But it's not that big of a system. Okay. We're down to the last 3 minutes. I think this has been a great session. Thank you all for your questions. One last chance. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, cool. Well, I want to thank you all again. I hope you learned something today, and enjoy the rest of the day of security. Why is that hard to say? But I love it anyway. All right. See you all.